Beautiful. Okay, so we have a special guest with us today, Elizabeth Clements, who, after some research and interacting with some other professionals, we've really just leaned into her professional guidance. She's been wonderful. I'm going to turn over the reins to her in just a moment, but I just like to see if we can just kind of feel into our bodies. Follow me in some deep breaths. I'm just going to guide you in, noticing where your breath naturally lands, just collecting that information. And on your next inhalation, see if you can have the breath even travel further, expanding down into your belly, creating space in your rib cage or your shoulder tops. And then a longer, more luxurious exhale. Let's do that again, breathing in. This time, let's just do a little squeeze of our pelvic floor, saying hello. Exhale. I'm going to shut off somebody's speaker. We're going to do this breath one more time. And on this next time, on your exhale, either do a body movement or a verbal, audible sound. So breathing in, expanding the torso. And when you're ready, exhale. Movement or sound or both. Great. Okay. Before I turn things over to Elizabeth, I do want to publicly acknowledge the folks who have been participating with Steve and myself on the ethics committee. So I, Dolly, the president, the current president of the ACSB, and Steve is the vice president. And we have expanded to have some committees. Some are more active than the others. And the ethics committee, we were able to get some other members to really join us, and we could not have done this without them. So I want to publicly acknowledge Elsa Capi, Christiana Palmas, Kian de la Cour, Mike Correll, Yuri Kotki, Steve, and myself. So I'll give myself a pat on the back, but really Christiane, Elsa's here. Elsa, you all wave to everybody. Elsa, Christiane, Mike. Yuri's not here, and Kian. Did I say Kian's name? Kian de la Cour. Kian will be joining us in just a little bit. He's has another commitment at this time on Wednesdays. So we have been meeting rigorously and also meeting with Elizabeth to start to unveil to you all what we've been working on. But really and truthfully, just hearing Elizabeth talk about this umbrella of what restorative justice is, I will just turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. So thanks for that stretch. That was nice to ground in my body for a second. So maybe I'll just start by saying that I came to this work as first a social worker and then a mediator, a conflict resolution professional, which I've been for over 20 years. And I saw in the course of my mediation practice that I was getting a lot of cases where people were fighting about something that was an entrenched conflict of some sort. But when I dug beneath the surface, there was often a history of child sexual abuse within the family system. And I noticed that mediation did not really address that very well that it just allowed for the parties to just kind of reiterate the hurtful things that they had always said. And so I went and spent many years looking for a process that would support family systems where child sexual abuse had occurred, whether that included the person who harmed or not. The family system was, even decades later, really struggling from the impact to the family system. And so I came across restorative justice, and I started an organization called Hidden Water, and it's a restorative justice response to child sexual abuse, where we include the person who was harmed, the non-offending parent or caregiver, loved ones of either the person who harmed or the person who was harmed, and then ultimately the person who caused sexual harm. And we've been running now for almost 8 years, I think 8 years now. And it is a powerful both process for healing from harm and conflict resolution. And so I'm going to just give you a little bit of the lay of the land, just so everyone's on the same page about these words and kind of what's the intention. And so you may want to post or pin my video if you can, so you can see that board. I'm a very visual person, so I like to draw on the board. So there's restorative justice. And restorative justice is actually a process distinct from criminal justice, in that where criminal justice is asking these questions: what law was broken, who broke that law, and what should their punishment be? That's criminal justice. Restorative justice is actually asking a different set of questions, which was: who was harmed, what was the impact of the harm, and who's available to help restore the system to a healed state. So you can notice in that set of questions, it's focused more on the person who was harmed, where in criminal justice, it's focused on the people who did the harm or broke the law. And so restorative justice is actually this process that's trying to address the people that were harmed and put them at the center of the process, and ask what needs to happen for the system to be restored, what needs to happen for healing to take place. Okay. So restorative justice is not, there are lots and lots of restorative justice processes. There's not just one. So for example, you may have heard of truth and reconciliation courts, or you may have heard of sentencing circles. Or you may have heard of community, oh my gosh, no, I'm gonna forget. Community conferencing. Sorry, I don't know where that went in my head. And circle is one of many, victim offender mediation. There's many restorative justice processes that are not circle. Okay. Then there's circle, which is, circle is an indigenous practice of being in relationship to community. It is not necessarily restorative justice. Sorry if you hear that whimpering, it's my dog outside the door. So circle can be used for many things. It doesn't have to be restorative justice. And so there are celebration circles, there are learning circles, there are community circles. There's all kinds. There's adventure circles. There's sewing circles. There's charity circles. There's all kinds of things, right? And so this process of sitting in circle does not need to be a restorative justice process. It can just be a circle. And often it needs to be a circle before it's a restorative justice process, because the community has to be woven in together for it to care about itself. Okay? But then there's this overlap where we look at restorative justice and using circle as a restorative justice processes. And so we think about, I guess actually sentencing circles would fit in there, but like conflict circles, sentencing circles. I should have looked up all these words before I got on this call. Sorry, I'm sort of spacing on them. But there's a lot of different ways. So Hidden Water is the organization I started, where we do both harm, we do healing circles and conflict circles within the family. They would fit into restorative justice processes. So most families where child sexual abuses occurred do not engage the
I'm
criminal.
so grateful for your courageous transparency.
Sorry, I don't know where that. Did you hear that? Yeah. Okay. So that wasn't in my head. That's good. So hidden water is an example of a restorative justice process that uses both circle and restorative justice. So one other way to look at this is to look at circle in a triangle. And so one thing we think about, most circles, first job of circle is to build community. And community is the way we weave a group of people together so that they will care about the impact of their behavior on each other and be accountable to one another. So first circle does the hard work of weaving a community together, which is partly, I think, the task in front of your group. Then we can look at circles once woven together can be problem solving. They can address an issue. They can say, as a community, how do we want to deal with environmental impact? Or as a community, how do we want to deal with, dues being paid or not being paid? You can take your circle and as a community, tackle a question. Okay? And then so that's harder than just community building. And then the third level, where we see the use of circle, and which I think is important for your group also, is how to deal with harm and conflict when it's been caused or when it's occurring. And now this is a more difficult circle to hold. So each one is more difficult than the next. And part of the training that I'm offering is that I will teach all three of those levels. And so we begin with learning how to hold the circle in terms of the mechanics, and how do we build safety, and how do we build community. And so we'll spend some time really focusing on how do you build a tight container so that you feel the weaving together of the community. Once you've woven it together, you can tackle more difficult issues. And part of tackling problem solving is being able to hold space for other people's ideas that are not your ideas, to allow for the wisdom and the collective understanding to surface. It means that people have to be giving different opinions and different ideas and different perspectives so that what will emerge is this collective wisdom. So we'll be working on that in the training. And then the final part, which is harder, and for sure harder, it's how do you hold space where someone's been harmed? And that's a very difficult thing, especially if so then the second thing is, how do you hold space for someone who has harmed? We think of those as in affinity circles often, like we're going to address them separately. But eventually you might see that you can get them to the place where it feels safe enough that you could put them together even. And so sometimes you have true harm and a harmer and a harmed person. And sometimes you have two people who both feel harmed by the other. And so in either way, you have to get it to a certain level of safety before you can engage in a conflict circle. And that's something else we will cover in the training. Let me see, does anybody have any questions before I go on to another piece of that? Yep, Mike?
Okay, thank you. I just have a brief question about the context. If you find it with your organization, there is a need to work in a different context than what you originally set up for. Some of these things tend to bleed into other areas of our lives. Some of them bleed into our professional lives outside of the family. And I'm wondering if your organization is set up to where you can adapt to different contexts for restorative justice.
Can you give me an example of what you're thinking about?
For example, we begin with a family where family members have been harmed. And it just so happens that, this is an issue that I actually brought up in our ethics committee because I felt as if restorative justice would have been the perfect solution or could be a perfect solution in my personal family, given the nature of my work and given the opposition. And so it sounds like you're designed for the family, and yet we are using restorative justice as an organization for professionals.
Right.
So the family dynamic is not going to be a factor in our context.
Right.
However, it has to be applicable.
Oh, yeah. Right. So we happen to work in family with families. However, we also are an organization that uses restorative justice to resolve conflict within our ranks also. But a system is a system, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a family system, an organization system, a member organization, a group of people, a neighborhood. A system is a system, and it actually shows up in a certain way, which is that we're relating to one another. Are we relating to one another intentionally? And are we relating to one another with boundaries, or are we crossing boundaries, or are we using aggressive anger as opposed to defensive anger, or are we manipulating as opposed to naming our inner world out loud? So there's a lot of things that come up when you sit in circle because of the circle rules that will help to, like I like to say, align you internally. It'll teach you skills in how you're going to relate to systems and other people, whether it's one-on-one or with a larger system, that reinforces the idea of respectful boundaries, and yet sharing to be known. And so a lot of times the whole idea of circle is that we're balancing the power so that it gets balanced by the nature of the rules of circle. And therefore, people who are accustomed to holding a lot of power really struggle in circle sometimes because they don't like it. They don't like to relate without having power, whatever their power might be. They might have a rank, or they might just be super articulate, or they might be someone that everyone looks up to, or for whatever reason they've gathered power. They don't like to lose it. And then there are other people who are very accustomed to staying in the shadows and not taking up space, and that this is their way of, their voice isn't getting heard, and therefore their wisdom isn't getting shared. But they're asked to step up and take their slice of the pie, so to speak, if you thought of a circle as pie pieces. And so we hear wisdom we would never hear otherwise, because the people who have a lot of power and talk a lot have to hold it. And people who normally would never fight to get a word in are offered, an opportunity and invited to speak. And so in this way, the power starts to balance, and therefore the dynamics in the system start to change, and people start to align internally in ways that honor a different way of relating to other people. Yeah. And so I think circle itself, or even circle training, when I give that training to organizations, two things happen. One is the people that participate in the training come into a way of relating to one another that is very different and distinct, right? So people who sit in the training together. And then the other thing that happens is it starts to build these muscles for how to relate in this one way, which is I'm going to share to be known. I'm going to authentically share what's up for myself. And I'm going to listen to know without trying to manipulate or trying to get you to do anything. I'm not going to fix it. Just going to hold a space for you to share. And then we'll see what comes up collectively. And that, if you think about it, that's not how we're accustomed or trained in our culture to relate to one another. We're trained to relate through power and taking power in whatever way we can, or appeasing and accommodating other people so that we feel safe. And this really disrupts that way of relating to other people. And so, those are kind of personal reasons why I think sitting in circle is a powerful way to learn a skill that's ultimately internal. But it's also as a system, as you sit in circle, especially in your situation where you're thinking about a grievance procedure, thinking about an ethics committee, you're trying to grow as a field. There's a way in which what will come up in a circle as collective wisdom will not come up. It will come up if you do it in a traditional meeting. It'll come up as competing points of view, as opposed to what will happen in circle, which is each point of view will get honored, and there will be 17 of those points of view, which will spark off new things that you would have never thought of as you hold space for every single point of view. And so it's a really powerful way, I find, to grow the system. You know, if you think about emerging strategies type of systems, you have to have a mechanism to hear the collective wisdom, or you will not be able to, you know, see what the next edge of this organization is meant to be. It'll just be one person executing their vision and hopefully getting other people on board. And that's a different way of growing a system, and not necessarily a bad way, but just a different way. Yeah. Christian?
Thank you, Elizabeth. I want to let everyone know on the call that that's, in fact, it's so lovely to hear you describe this, Elizabeth, because for those of you who weren't involved in the drafting and rewriting of what is now our brand new, ready to be unveiled accountability process, that's exactly how it happened. It happened in such a beautiful, respectful circle way where everybody's, I think somebody can chime in if they feel that it didn't happen this way, but there were many, many meetings where I just had my head in my hands thinking, how will we accommodate everyone's belief systems and everyone's needs? And I think that we did, and people came from diverse institutions and different ways of practicing, and we all figured out how to hear each other. It's important for everyone to know that happened, that the roots of our process are in integrity with the process we're wanting to hear grievances within.
Yeah, I think so too. I thought you all did a really beautiful job in developing that. Other questions about restorative justice, or the training, or the process, the grievance process, or how restorative justice circle may play out for systems when they're trying to face down harm or conflict? Yeah, Steve?
Could you speak to how we must come to these circles? Like, what must we already, like, if we're resisting the experience, or we're denying some experience, doesn't that preclude us from participating in the process?
What kind of experience do you mean? Like, if you're
Well,
coming
like
to the circle training but you don't want to be there, or a different?
No, not the training, but to come to restorative justice, I already have to be willing to listen. There's something like the carceral model is really about denying that I've done anything wrong. And if some grievance is brought forth, what kind of willingness can you speak to that? Like, how must I be willing to receive it as a community member?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if there's a grievance against a person and they're offered a restorative justice process, there is a threshold level of willingness that people have to come to. And restorative justice begins with the voluntary nature of the process. And so there's a process for, I didn't do it, yes you did, no I didn't, yes I did, prove it. You know, that's a different process with a very different intention. And you know, my experience having mediated for many decades now in criminal justice cases and different things is that, you know, this deny, deflect, minimize, justify, blame the victim nature of criminal justice systems, or anything that mimics that system, it's not healing, it's just rights-based. And restorative justice is really an opportunity to see the nuance and the complexity of things, and understand where they're coming from, as people are fallible and they come with lots of triggers and shadow and trauma, and it interacts with other people. And the ultimate goal is to help people heal, you know, both people who are accused of something and people who are accusing, and the community around them. You know, something about restorative justice is when you can see that it's not just you, you know, it's the person that feels harmed by you, and it's everyone else who supports you and supports them. or both. It's the community's reputation. It's the organizational community. It will have reverberating impacts. And if you are a person who can see that, and your willingness to step into a restorative justice process so that the entire system is accountable for itself. One of the centerpieces or the paradigm shifts in restorative justice is that nobody does anything on their own. That there was a whole system that was colluding with that. And so when a whole system colludes, then a whole system can be responsible for something going wrong, and then it should be. And then that's a very different worldview than, say, the criminal justice system, which is you are entirely responsible for not breaking the law, and if you did like that. And even maybe you didn't break the law, or maybe you were found not guilty. It doesn't mean that person doesn't feel harmed by you. It doesn't mean there won't be reverberations both from a guilty verdict or a not guilty verdict. There are reverberations throughout the community. And so it's sort of the opposite of a healing system. And so when you say, people do have to be bought into a restorative justice process, because ultimately there is a threshold question, which is if you show up at a restorative justice process to deny, deflect, minimize, justify, and blame the victim, it's just going to harm more. And so we do have to do more work to set up and make sure that restorative justice is an appropriate process for whatever the situation is, because sometimes it's not.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, Dolly, do you, I know that you had me here for an hour, and I kind of covered everything I wrote down, but I can go into more depth about what the components of the training are, or we could talk more about the grievance procedure. What feels like the right thing to you?
Well, I'd love for you to two things. To have this focus, like what we've brought forth with you, us being a community. If one person is harmed, as a practitioner, as a client, our real desire to uphold the profession of sexological body work and really have this transformative experience of healing is kind of one area to kind of how do you see this contributing to our field overall?
Yeah.
But then this other idea of these other steps before we even get to the restorative justice. And we all, because we wrote the document and we talked with you, and we were knowing about like a discovery conversation, and then perhaps an affinity circle. And then kind of as you kind of go through these different steps in order to get to the place of restorative justice, can you just kind of speak to those steps? You just alluded to it, but
yeah,
kind of walking them through the process that
Sure.
we have kind of come up with collectively.
Well, so let me start with one component that is a little bit more in depth. But when you have conflict or when you have harm happening inside of an organization, right? Sorry, I gotta change my. There's usually 4 groups of people involved in harm. There's the person that harmed. Sorry, this is not the right color pen for this. There's the person who harmed, and for us, we call that green, was harmed. Then there's, of course, the person who did the harm, right? Harmed someone else. Let's just say in simple terms. But there's 2 groups of people that we very rarely think about. One is someone who witnessed the harm and had no power. And then there's another who witnessed the harm and has power. And these 2 groups of people are really important when it comes to restorative justice and how we are going to think about the impact on the system. So people on the grievance committee, for example, they have power. They may have witnessed it. I'm talking about witness it maybe even after the fact when someone tells them about what happened. But then they're a witness and they're a party to this conflict. They're a party to this harm because they're sitting with power, and how they use their power could harm too, right? Or it could help heal. Then there are people who witness the circumstances with no power, like perhaps I'm a client and I got harmed by a practitioner, and then I went and told another client, and now they're scared because we've all been harmed sexually as children, and we were using this process to try to heal. And now there's this reverberating harm through the participants, or the clients, I guess you call them. But I don't have any power. I feel afraid. I feel afraid to confront the practitioner. I'm afraid to not, I don't know what to do. And those people are getting what we think of as secondary harm. And so at some point, this system has to move in a direction of saying something needs to be done. I want, somebody will take leadership, and it's not always the person who was harmed. Sometimes it's one of the witnesses. Sometimes it's even the person who did the harm themselves. Once the process gets going, we usually think about ourselves as breaking into affinity circles, because we need to establish some ability to what we call walk the path of the victim, and that needs to happen in a safe setting. And so the person who's harmed may sit with other support people. Maybe it's some of the other colors in your case. In our case, it's different. But we need to come up with a circle of people so that people can start to identify, how has this harm impacted me? What do I want to do about it? And then there's another affinity circle for the person who harmed, also surrounded by people who that person trusts, the people that can see that whole person, not just the thing that happened, and support them in starting to take responsibility for the impact of their behavior on another. Okay, start to tap into both being able to articulate what that is and feel remorse. Sometimes we even do affinity circles for the other two groups, but in your case, I think these people may join that circle, and these people may join both circles. And then we just do that work. Sometimes that work is enough. You know, sometimes this affinity circle is all the person who was harmed wants to do. And they feel better, they feel seen, they feel witnessed, they feel held in it, and they have their steps forward, whatever they might be, in terms of how they want to process that. Sometimes you have an affinity circle here where the person who harmed does really great work, and they really want the chance to sit and show remorse and take responsibility with the other. Sometimes, and then this person may not be ready or may not want that, in which case you can't. Okay? Sometimes you sit in the affinity circle with the person who harmed and recognize that this person is doing what we think of as phase one, which is deny, deflect, minimize, justify, blame the victim. And as long as they're caught in what we call phase one, which is that, then we would never let them join the other in a conflict circle, because they'll just do more damage. And so sometimes it's enough for them to sit in this setting and be held accountable for the impact of their behavior on someone else by the witnesses with power. Sometimes you'll have a witness who feels powerful enough to go into that affinity circle, even though they don't feel like they have a lot of power. They may just serve as a surrogate victim in that setting. And so one of the things that is happening in the grievance procedure that you all came up with was that people can make a statement of harm. I'm forgetting what it's called, statement of harm. And that might be all they want. They just want the witnesses with power to read it, and they feel better. That might be it. Or I want to meet with the witnesses with power, in this case, the grievance committee, and I just want to tell my story, and then that's it. I will let Dolly and Steve and other people, Christian, talk about, every step, because I might not have every step in my head. But then the next step would be affinity circles. It's not very often that you put everyone together until you give them a chance to sit in a circle space where they're speaking around, that the container is safe, the community is safe for them, and they get a chance to speak to how they were harmed. I recently did a sexual harassment circle for a record company, and all the top people, all the owners and the top positions were all white men, and there were a lot of women who were in lower positions who felt very sexually harassed and harmed by both musicians and artists and staff. And they finally brought it forward, and to their credit, they said, we want to do a restorative justice process. And so for 3 months, I sat with just the women and I sat with just the men. And the women's circle had a lot of what we call offensive anger, which is totally appropriate, but it isn't the way we want to go into the conflict circle. And so they worked through their anger and spoke and articulated the ways in which it impacted them, the ways in which it impacted them in the short term, the ways in which it impacted them in the long term. And as they got more seen by each other, they became, more grounded, and the shame event moved away from them, and they became more advocates for themselves and less, vulnerable to being harmed again if someone didn't exactly see it the way they saw it. Right? And so we needed them in a powerful position of feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling held, feeling believed, and getting to the place where they didn't need those men to say the right thing for them to be able to speak it. We worked in this circle, and I worked in this circle for 3 months also, while these men denied, deflect, minimized, justified, and blamed the victim, and told story after story after story about why they weren't to blame and why it was really a shakedown and why it was and to have me speak the voice of the women who are being impacted in a safe way. I was really a witness with no power. I had some power, but not really, because I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer, but I kept saying, here's why that would be hurtful. Here's why I think you're not thinking through that clearly. Here's why this is not going to heal if that's the way you see it. And here's some of the things that I think you can be held accountable for. What do you think? And little by little, they shifted. And there was some responsibility taking. I wouldn't have even taken the case if there weren't at least some responsibility being taken. And so the men in that circle could say things like, well, it's probably true we underpay women. It's probably true that there's a bit of a drinking culture that's not as safe for them as it is for us, like that. And then little by little, they got to a stronger and stronger acknowledgement of their responsibility for the impact that this has had, right? And then once we were there, I just want another color to draw on the board if I can. We did a conflict circle. And the conflict circle included the two people that were principally harmed and other, 4 other women who maybe didn't think of themselves as being sexually harassed, but they worked there, they witnessed it, they felt like they couldn't speak up, kind of thing. Then we had the main person who did the sexual harm, and then we had all of these other partners who were colluding and covering it up, basically. And so and then there was me. And we met for 4 sessions, I believe, and it really was powerful. Like, it was very powerful. And the women spoke their truth and the men held it. And then the men spoke their truth, which included being accountable, and the women felt relieved. And then they came up with a really beautiful settlement that wasn't just about money, although there was money involved. The more powerful parts that everyone grabbed onto is, how are these women going to help shape and shift the system so that it doesn't happen again? And it was a really beautiful process. So I tell you that story in some ways because that's maybe the ultimate, but you don't always get all the way to the ultimate. Sometimes you just get through the affinity circle. Sometimes you just get through the naming of the harm, and then that's it. Sometimes, the person who's being accused of harming doesn't want to sit in this process. And so we hold, in restorative justice, we hold it to be what it is. We don't try to make it be anything more than that. And so the door's open for it to keep following the path if it wants to, and then sometimes it doesn't want to. Everything in circle is an invitation, not a directive. And that matters. Because if you walk into a conflict resolution process feeling your self-determination and your agency, you can make a powerful shift and and repair. But if you go in under duress or feeling like you have to, it'll never really repair. Anybody want to say anything about that? Or what's coming up for them when they hear it? Did I see some hand? Was that you, Tim? Yeah.
One thing I am noticing is that it seems like this process requires a fairly substantial time commitment from everybody involved. And one of the things that we're having a discussion around is who pays.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with that in these type of things? Because currently the ACSB is a volunteer organization. And so there's going to be an immense amount of sort of volunteer labor associated with this. I'm curious about how in your work you've seen this work out in a way that is effective and at least considering of the time commitment that it's going to take for all of the parties involved.
Right. So I will just go back to the organization that I actually run, which is called Hidden Water. We're a volunteer organization. Also, we have a very, very small staff, but mostly, dozens and dozens of people who are volunteers. And everyone is a circle keeper. And so, we lay out, this is what the time commitment will be if you want to sit in support of this particular conflict. And I am surprised sometimes, but we've never not had people step up to do it, because they love the people involved or because they think it's interesting to learn and grow and have an opportunity to sit in through a process like this. Lots of people like to get hired and work in this way. And so the chance, it's pretty rare that you get a chance to be a part of a process like this. So people want to avail themselves of it. Restorative justice is everywhere these days. And so the chance that you can move through a real conflict and be a part of it is actually it's a gift in some ways. Like when I think I got paid for that sexual harassment case because I was the organizer of it, but no one else did. Like a lot of those women didn't work at that company anymore. And they showed up for hours and hours and hours to participate just to be in support of the two women who had been harmed. And all of those top men in that thing also were, I guess they're kind of getting paid, but they don't have jobs where they're punching the clock. And so they had to show up in their free time outside and still get their work done. And there wasn't one person who didn't say, I'm so glad I participated in that. I grew personally from it. Even when you're the witness, even when you're one of the people holding space. So, I think that's partly the answer. I think there's something that gets taken away when you think, oh, it's a job I'm getting paid for. That there's something that shifts the energy in that case. So, the other part of your question that comes up for me, and I'll let anybody else answer if they want to answer this, is that it's true that if you are the person who was harmed or you're the person who is being named as someone who harmed, it's a big commitment for you, not just time-wise, but emotionally. It's vulnerable, it's scary, it's not easy to walk that path. Either walk the path of the victim or walk the path of the perpetrator. We like to reclaim those words to mean anyone and everyone, but that's a difficult path. And so I find it's a special kind of person who wants to walk it. It's not just time, it's also the emotional edge that you have to be on if you're going to be one of those two people. You want to say anything else about that, Tim?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, for what you said about the process and it being a reward in itself. I completely agree with that. And just to speak to the community at large who's on this call, it's going to require all of us. Like there's been a number of people who have been dedicating a lot of volunteer time to this, and yet we are going to be reaching out to the community at large, which is all of you on the call and all of your colleagues who you can reach out to and speak about this, because we are going to need help from our community to do this. And I just really wanted to speak that loud and clear, that if we as a professional organization and a group of professionals that is trying to embody a profession that's on the edge, and that we're doing new work that's fairly uncharted, we as a community are going to need to support each other by volunteering our time and our emotional capacity to support this type of system. So I think that I wanted to just make a clarion call out to all of us as professionals, that if you feel inspired on this call, please reach out to one of the members of the ethics board, because we need your help.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I really appreciate that. Audrey?
I'll just lead with saying that I love hearing everything you're describing, and it's very inspiring. My question was, and I don't know how to say this in like a non-crass way, but how do you determine when is it like legitimate for a claim of harm to move forward? Is the idea that people, whoever claims, says they're harmed, they're given the benefit of the doubt, and that the community process will be initiated? Or is there like is there an evaluation of legitimacy of that claim for the resources to be used to then remediate?
Yeah, so I think one of the ways I like to think about that is, if someone feels they were harmed, then they were. Like, the thing that they think harmed them might not be, wait, did she just fall off? Okay, maybe.
No, I'm here. I just lowered.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, you switched, so I lost you. So it really resides in my mind in distinguishing between subjective truth and objective truth. And so vast majority of what's happening is subjective truth. And so if I say that, you just harmed me, Audrey, because you looked at me weird, that's true. Like, I got harmed somehow. I saw something and it harmed. You may have no idea what I'm talking about. I may start to attribute things to you that aren't true, like you hate me. I can tell you hate me, right? That might not be true for you, and you should say so. But the fact that I just got harmed and I'm having some internal experience, it's just true. It's true for me. Now, is there an objective truth in there that you looked at me weird? I don't know. We could poll everyone. But then there's your subjective truth, which is, I don't hate you, Elizabeth. I was kind of excited. I was kind of psyched about what you were saying. And I'm like, oh, now your subjective truth is that. And we're going to start, relating around those two things. And so to me, we always believe someone's subjective truth. I find it's quite rare that people are actually right out front lying, like maybe facts get remembered differently and intention gets attributed unfairly and all kinds of things, right? But if someone feels harmed enough to write a grievance, then we believe them. But then we go to the person that they're feeling harmed by and with complete openness say, what's your experience? This person feels harmed, and we want to honor that they feel harmed, but we also want to hear how you're feeling or how you perceive that or what happened from your point of view. And so we start to hold subjective truth as the priority. And, we often talk about, we call walking the path of the perpetrator. Everyone harms. We all harm unintentionally, hopefully, right? But we're all harming all the time. And so can we walk the path of the perpetrator, even regardless of our intention? So if I'm going to break up with someone, I'm for sure going to hurt them. And I can still be accountable to the impact I'm having on them and not even want to change what I did. I could accidentally hurt you and be like, oh my God, I totally did do that. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to land that way, but you're right. I said that. And, I was having a bad day and I'm so sorry that hurt you. And so there's a way to honor your intention and the goodness of who you are and be accountable for the impact that your behavior had on someone, even though maybe 80% of it is perception on their part. And so we start to make those distinctions when we do a grievance process like this, because at the end of the day, this happens even in mediation. It's like, you hurt me. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. There's like nowhere to go from there. There's nowhere to go if you're going to just try to reside. You're just going to try to have the entire thing rest on objective facts, because that's not really where it happens. You know, I mediate a lot in court, and I just kind of laugh at, I don't laugh, it's very sad actually, but I watch people even win in court and they're still mad. They're still mad because they wanted the judge to yell at the other person, you know, or whatever it was. They got $5,000. They wish they had gotten 10, you know, or whatever it is. And it's like, there's nothing healing about that process. It's like, it's going on the objective facts, and both people often leave mad. Both people feel betrayed at the end of the process, even when they win, you know, a lot of the time. And so we're trying to pull it into a different realm where it exists differently and in a more complex way. Do you want to say anything more about that?
No, it's just very inspiring. I love hearing what you have to say.
Oh, good. Anybody else want to say anything or comment or bring anything up yet, Dolly?
Can you talk about how confidentiality is handled, and any ramifications, or just I guess the confidentiality?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to make a distinction between, I think the more confidential it can be, the better, because if you're not in the process, you don't really know what's going on. Like, you haven't heard the nuance. You may be heard, oh, someone hurt someone else, and now you're going to make up a lot of stuff that you don't know because you don't know. But, you know, if you're not sitting in the circle, then it's my experience that the less you know, the better, because you can't really know unless you're sitting in the process yourself. But I do make a distinction, and we make a distinction in my organization also, if there's imminent harm, you know, like someone is in danger of being harmed again, then we might make a different call on that. Yeah. And so you have to make some call around safety issues, I think, in your organization, to have a lens where you look at that as a potential question. But then once you've determined that there is no one in danger of being harmed in the future, then I would keep it as confidential as you possibly can, except to the, you know, even to the extent that we'll say, I have something I want to, can I call you later, Dolly, and tell you about something that I was thinking about after circle? And you're going to say, actually, Elizabeth, that'd be great if you bring it up in our next circle. Because we don't want like all this talking going on outside the circle. We want all of that important stuff to be said in the circle. So if I go to Dolly and I say, oh, Dolly, blah, 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 and then we get back into circle and the rest of you don't know what I said, but I've shifted, Dolly shifted, but nobody else knows what's happened, then you've lost a lot of the potential support. And so we try to say, only say it in circle. The other thing that people want to do is like write long emails after circle and be like, Christiane, you know what? This is what I wanted to say to you in circle, but I did it. And I write a whole long email and blast it off to her or to many people. We don't do that either, because now I'm not accountable for my words. You know, I don't have to sit with how that impacted Christiane, and I'm free to write some nasty thing in my email. And I don't have to listen to how she felt or anyone else felt about it. And so confidentiality we start to try to contain the entire conversation inside the circle so that you're both accountable to the impact of your words. And everyone is privy and shifting together so that the healing and the wisdom will come up from the collective. And if you're going to talk on the outside, then you're going to rob the circle space of the potential for that wisdom and that healing. I did want to say one other thing that I think you didn't bring up, but you know, we talked too about power. I think we talked a little bit about this with the people I was working with. It's like mostly you don't have power as the circle keeper. I had some power when I was doing that sexual harassment case. Obviously, I had power to decide whether they're ready to go together. I had power about what the prompts were. I had power about who could be in the circle and who couldn't be. You know, so there's some moments where you have power, but mostly what we're going for is no power, equal power amongst the people. And so the circle keeper gets diminishing ability to make decisions and it transfers the power to the collective away from the individual. Now, in your case, there's probably a couple moments, there's a couple things where you have power. You're going to have to decide whether or not there's a dangerous situation, and you maybe head off the restorative justice process right there. You're going to make a decision about whether or not people feel ready to go into conflict circle. You might have some power about whether you continue to go on if people are getting hurt. You know, there's moments where you will have power as the grievance folks, but mostly you don't. And so you should recognize that the beauty of it is transferring the power to the collective, and mostly letting it reign in that place. Did I cut you off, Dolly? Did you want to say something else? I know I changed the subject too. So
No, I'm like trying to think. If the idea of like NDA is brought up, is that coming from a different like a different framework than this framework, or is that part of this?
I mean, it's a little bit the old framework because the NDA gives you the right to sue someone, right, if confidentiality gets broken, I think. But we have, in my organization, we have NDAs because we want to really try to protect, you know, especially because we have people who have harmed coming forward. You know, we really want to try to protect confidentiality. And you know, the lawyers in my organization wrote the NDA and I rewrote it, you know, and I was like, I don't want it to sound so punitive. I want it to sound like in the interest of really doubling down on confidentiality, because safety is so crucial for this process to work in the way it's meant to work. We're going to ask that you voluntarily agree to an NDA type agreement, you know, like that. And so I just changed the words, and then the lawyers, you know, put all their lawyerly language in it. And, you know, I hoped that I could like kind of bridge the two, because I do think there's something to be said about saying, yeah, there's, you know, I'm signing up for something and I'm truly not, you know, I'm going to be held accountable to confidentiality, but I'm doing so voluntarily. You know, I'm not doing it because I'm being coerced. I'm doing it because I really do believe in confidentiality, so much so that I will sign this document.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And
Mhm.
Elizabeth, I just really wanted to touch into something that you said earlier to clarify around power.
Yeah.
Because we are creating this set of policies and procedures for a professional organization. And I want to thank the Canadian cohort for this, about clearly speaking power dynamics so that it's clear in the community and circle what we are doing. And I will say that in this situation, in terms of regulating a professional organization, there is a power dynamic at play, and I want to speak it clearly so it's not confused and under the radar. The power dynamic at play here is the ability of a committee to do something like take away certification. So yeah, we are in a position, there is power things happening here as a reason to regulate our community. That's why we're trying to formulate policies and procedures around this. So I just really wanted to speak clearly that in the restorative justice process that we've been creating it with your help, that's our hope and prayer, but we also do have an arbitration process as well within policies and procedures. And so I just really wanted to be clear with our community here that what we're talking about is regulating ourselves and our community. And that is a position of power, and there is potential consequences to behaviors and actions within this. And it sort of gets back to, yeah, that's right. I'm seeing that, Pono. Joseph Kramer has been the one who has essentially been the one to certify all teachers and all of our certifications. So what the part of the reason for this whole process has been him asking us as a community to take that power away from him. And so we are working in towards these things, but I do want to speak that there is a power dynamic happening here. So we should, as a community, try to clearly speak what some of those powers are and decide as a community what our powers really are in terms of regulating each other. And I just really wanted to speak that is part of what's happening here. And it is part of the process of trying to figure out how we are as a community going to work together to self-regulate our community. And there is some power dynamics in there that I feel like need clarification.
Great. Thank you, Tim. I want to let everybody know that once Elizabeth gets off the call, in probably the next 5 minutes or so, we will stay on to kind of go through the process that we have come up with so far and to let you know kind of where we are with things. But I know we have a time limit with Elizabeth, so I want to bring it back to her to maybe have you explain about the course that you're going to be doing for us. And then once she gets off the call, we'll talk about what that means and who might be interested in how that would look. But if you can kind of talk about the 6 weeks that you're going to hold for around 15 folks who decide to participate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will talk about that for a second. I just did want to just comment though on what Tim just said, because I think it's so important. And we grapple with it too, that, you know, you want to have an organization that has this restorative justice, community sensibility, or this culture of shared power. And it's not true. You know, like there's some way in which it is not true. And you have to hold those two things. I mean, it's hard to hold those two things because the ideal is that the community will regulate itself. And there are moments where you are taking power and you have power and you can't deny that you have it. And so this, you know, we go through this all the time, like, oh, you're being so top down. It's like, sometimes you are, sometimes you're being top down. Sometimes you're saying, hey, you cannot participate. You know, we have a lot of trouble with sometimes the white folks in our community say really hurtful things and the people of color get very hurt. It's like, listen, you really got to do your whiteness work before you can sit in these spaces. And it was like, oh, you're being so top down. Yeah, I am being kind of top down, you know, because you will pull the power chip when it's about safety. And there are other times you will. And so sometimes you got to come into relationship to sort of the paradox of that, because there's all kinds of ways you can be transferring power and, you know, have it, you know, even if it's like 5 people having the decision-making power as opposed to 1, that's a big difference. And even though there's still power among the 5. And so I really look forward to grappling with that question because it's a hard one and it's a beautiful one. I love that question. So thank you, Tim, for raising it. As far as the training goes, so that's 24-hour training. We sit in circle almost the entire time. There'll be very few times where we like do what we call suspend the talking piece, and you can just ask questions as if in you know, a traditional classroom. That'll be very limited. It's mostly sitting in circle because it's my experience. You don't really learn circle except sitting in it. I could teach it to you. I always say I could teach you circle in a text message, but you will not really learn it unless you sit in circle. And so the 24 hours, and it's 4 hours at a time, which I have never done, but we'll make it work. We'll have to have a break, obviously, if not 2 breaks in there. Is online. And the first part of the circle is really the mechanics, the community building part of the circle. I'm going to teach you how to sit in circle, have fun with circle, enjoy circle, get your body used to sitting in this way, in this formation. And then ask you to actually hold your own circle somewhere, and just with your friends or your family, something light, something easy, people you trust, people who trust you. And you don't have to do the hardest, deepest, darkest, most difficult circle, just something easy to start to get used to. Just like I always think, like the informal circle, like you're sitting in a meeting and everyone's talking, and then finally you're like, hey, let's use a talking piece. You know, I want you to be that familiar with circle, that, you know, that let it come to you that easily. So part of it is just starting to do it in your own life. I have a lot of frameworks. I have a lot of different paradigm shifting ways of looking at things. This is how we traditionally look at it. Let me ask you to look at it this way. And so, you know, because it's ancient and because it's indigenous, circle really has the, you know, if you're going to be good at circle keeping, you're going to have to shift your way of seeing the world. And so there's some things we're going to do to try to grab onto that. And we're going to talk about safety building. How do you create safety in a circle? How do you create safety? It's easy to create safety when everyone loves you and they're your friends, you know, and the topic is easy. It's hard. It gets harder and harder to create safety. The changing the people and changing the topic. And so I want to start to build your stamina for how to hold safe space, even when the circle gets harder and harder and harder. Then I'm gonna walk you through the path to healing from harm and ask you to walk it yourself. So we'll do some work on a time we felt harmed. We'll do some work on a time we've harmed. It doesn't have to be the hardest thing that ever happened in your life. It can be something simpler so that we can see the path of healing from harm playing out. Because I think if you're going to participate in this grievance procedure for this organization, you're going to have to be really adept at the path to healing from harm. You cannot sit in judgment as if you've never harmed. You're going to have to walk the path of the harmer. And you can't sit and be like, oh, these victims. You got to walk the path of the victim yourself, or you're never going to be able to come with the humility that you need to in order to do these potentially really hard cases for your organization. And then the last thing we'll do is address conflict. And, you know, conflict could be its own whole training. I teach conflict resolution 100 hours. And so it'll just be a touch on conflict. But in some ways, if you build a strong container and you hold to the principles, conflict will be okay. It'll be okay. The circle can hold conflict without you being super skilled, as long as you're skilled in holding space and leaning into the circle process. So, but we will touch on conflict and how you might handle and set up a conflict case for circle. And so mostly experiential. And we'll read a book probably, or chapters of a book called Beyond Harm, and talk about it. It's a really deep, powerful book. And I think that's probably it. Anybody have any questions about that? Wait, I gotta open up my chat. Trainers training. Yeah, I don't, but we can talk about that too. Any questions about the training? All right. Anything else, Dolly?
I'm trying to think. I know Audrey has a question, but we're going to talk about the dates and the cost and all of that. Is that a question maybe that you were leaning towards? Yeah, we're going to talk about that after Elizabeth gets off. I never want you to go. Can you just like hang out with us like forever? I just love hearing, like, it just all makes sense. So I feel that at this time, I think that's a really good kind of overview. Know that when we do work with Elizabeth, we are paying her her professional fee. We are potentially looking to hold this class with Elizabeth once a year for maybe two, maybe 3 years. We just want to get as many people in the community into this mindset, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I think I might have some follow-up questions for you, which we'll do via email. And I just thank you for your time. And yes, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I just want to say how much I honor your organization for stepping into this space. I'm also very impressed with the people I've worked with so far. I know I talk really fast and about really deep, complex things, and it's amazing to me how easily you absorb it. I'm impressed. And so I really look forward to working with all of you in the future and find your work really fascinating. So thank you all.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, we'll talk.
Yeah. And we're continuing, so please don't drop off. This is just Elizabeth.
Just me leaving.
Yes.
Yeah, just Elizabeth leaving.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Steve, you'll take over this next part. And
Yes.
I think also Christiane mentioned about helping you going through like the steps of what we've come up with.
Great. Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to just acknowledge that this has never been done for our field. We have had issues in the past, before my time as a sexological body worker, and maybe some of you as well. And there's never been a process for grievances that has been consistent and successful. So we're taking on something that is really groundbreaking. And if you look at other sexuality professionals and other fields and other associations, there's nothing that exists for that either. You know, some of you may be familiar with some of the very public issues that have come up culturally in the tantra world or in other realms, where the only recourse that people had was to out someone publicly. That is not what we're about as a community. This is all in the spirit of healing and community and moving forward and learning. So, and we've taken a tremendous amount of time to really have that be the cornerstone of what we're up to. So I just wanted to highlight that, and then kind of share some of the details of what we're rolling out with this training. And you'll have to help me. So it's 6 weeks. It will be beginning. I'm going to just pull up my calendar because it's in my calendar, not in my head. It will begin on 6 consecutive Thursdays, beginning April 29th, 11 a.m. Pacific time, and it will be 6 consecutive Thursdays. And the hours are from, it is 5 hours, 11, 12, yes, but is it 5, 11?
4 hours.
4 hours.
Yeah. Elizabeth normally teaches this 2 hours a week for 12 weeks, but we begged her, how can we condense this a little bit smaller? So she's doing 4 hours for 6 weeks. And it was the time that worked for her. It was what she had available, 2 to 6 Eastern. So then I guess that's 11 or no, 12. Well, we'll figure out it's I'm just looking at what she said, 2 to 6 Eastern.
Yeah. And the people who we are, who will be, ultimately everyone will apply, because we want to limit this to 15 people who will then serve as the Grievance Council. And we'll have an agreement to be in a rotating role. So you won't be a full, it's obviously won't be full time, but you'll be in a role receiving any grievances and reviewing with the Grievance Council. And you may be assigned to a specific review process for a grievance that comes in. That process, and we can speak to that in a bit, and I'll let Christiane talk about that. Could be, kind of like what Elizabeth was saying. It could be a very short process. One phone call might be it, or it could take months. As Tim was pointing out, this may be a lot of volunteer labor. But I also want to highlight, this is tremendously valuable. I've already, in the work that we've been doing, seen the value. I work with couples, and I'm like, oh my God, it's illuminating how positional we are about things, and how that's not that's an old model of relationship. And this actually brings about a lot of possibilities for how to empower people to get back to loving one another. If that's the context that you're working in with couples or people in their lives as a practitioner. So the fee that we are looking at is her fee is $12,000, and we divided that by 15, and it comes out to $800. So that's the tuition for this. Now, it is our intention that we be able to subsidize that somewhat. We don't know how many people are going to participate right now, so we intend to subsidize that some, because we want people trained and we want them to have the opportunity to participate in the Grievance Council. So the plan is to have the tuition be $800. And a big piece of it is we want to honor all participants in our membership. We want to have, we want to allow for, a wide range of different practitioners' levels of experience, as well as including BIPOC and the underserved who might not feel represented in our community. So we really want to have diversity on the Grievance Council and have the full representation of not just our membership, but the community at large. So does anyone want to ask a question or speak to that? Yeah, Mike.
Want to throw an idea in there, and this is just the initial part of everything we're doing. We're actually pioneering this whole thing, as you mentioned, Steve. And initially, everything is going to be slightly difficult for everyone, but it takes a certain mindset and a certain person. It takes a true leader to pioneer something like this and give themselves in the beginning. But that does not mean that it cannot become sustainable down the road, so that it at least carries its own weight. So we still have a lot of work to do, because we have our business committee that we need to get in touch with, our legal committee, our education committee, all working together can actually make this a sustainable operation and a place that feels safe and sustainable to work in for professionals. That's my dream. That's my vision. And I just want to thank everybody that has been participating so far. Again, we can't thank you guys enough for all the work that you've done so far. And I want to thank everybody that is here today on the call that is listening for the first time in a long time, or has never been privy to any of this information before. This is work that needs to be done on a global scale. And I just want to thank everybody for being here.
Thanks, Mike. Audrey, you have your hand up.
I'm assuming this is the case, but if we were to participate, would we need to be at every training live, I'm assuming?
That is currently
So have
plan.
the availability for the full 6.
I think so, because we would be in circle. It's not like you can watch it. You're having to reflect. I will triple check that, but I believe that's what's been presented to us. Okay. The way we will look at this, we will send a follow-up email to membership to let you know the prices, that remind you all about the prices. We're looking at numbers and what we'll be able to offer. The commitment to be on the ethics committee is we're really looking to have a 2-year commitment. Because it's like you're going to get all this training, but you're not going to always be busy. And then you can participate in the ACSB in other ways. And, we pray there's not a lot of grievances to have to deal with. That would actually be the ideal, and that we could use the training to hold circles for other kinds of amazing things. So if you're kind of waiting to be called into action, one could create a whole circle opportunity in using this training. But because we just want to hold, you're already members. So when people are already looking to be in professional community, they're already holding themselves to a higher, level of accountability. So now this is just taking it to that next place. And I know there was a question about removal of certification and such. Yeah, the ACSB does not have that capability. Where we are now with our process, and then we'll have Christiane talk about kind of like the stages and steps of how we see our current process. We will be making our document that we've been working on available for everybody to look at and to read. It is going to be sent this week to the heads of schools. So we want their input. We've been working on it. Elizabeth has put her input. Now we're looking for the heads of schools, because we do want to look to see what their participation will be. If somebody a practitioner under review comes up that was certified by one of their schools, we're looking to see how they might participate in the process. So there's still some unfinished business that we need to tend to. But again, this is the process. We're finally at a place where we can just even let you know, like, we can breathe and things are starting to move forward. So some people are asking about next year's dates. But back to, if you want to participate, we'll probably have you email Steve. I'll put that in the email. Steve has been acting as the ethics chair. So we will collect the people who want to participate, and there will likely be an interview process. Okay. We hope there's more than 15 of you who want to do this. Okay. Some of the people who are on the current ethics committee will do the training, and there are some of us who will be taking a step back because we want to really create some space for y'all to step into some leadership positions. If the time commitment and the course is not available in your schedule this year, I will see if I can secure some dates for next year with a shift of the time to make it more amenable for other time zones. And we would just invite you to participate in the in the board and the committees in other ways, since elections are coming up. Alrighty.
Can I just say that I just put my email address in the chat window. Even you don't have to send me a lengthy email, just indicate your interest. You can just say, hey, Steve, I'm interested. And then we'll let you know what the application process is. Or if you want to send me a private message now, that's fine too. Yeah, I'm really excited. Do you want to take a few minutes, Christiane, to kind of highlight the process that we've developed? We don't quite have enough time to go through the whole specifics of it, but are there any bullet points that we can?
I think given what we've already talked about here, maybe the most important bullet point, and anybody else from the committee and from the process chime in here if I get it wrong, but I think the most important thing to say is that might in some ways differ from what Elizabeth shared with us, is that we are, I think, in our process attempting to make a distinction between harm and impact. And we wouldn't necessarily just assume that someone who comes forward with a statement, a grievance statement, has been harmed. We would acknowledge there has been impact. And because our resources are so limited, we can't actually pursue every single experience of impact or so-called harm. So what we've come to, which seems professionally in integrity, is that the ACSB and the Grievance Council can really only hear statements and facilitate processes that describe a direct conflict or breach of whatever is our current code of conduct and ethics. That's really the only responsible purview we have. So this is really in response, Audrey, to your important questions, but also to let everybody know that we're not going to become some giant arbitration institution that hears all statements of harm or experiences of harm. We really can only stay within the purview that is described by whatever is the current code of conduct and ethics, which is also under review and will be edited and updated. But for now, it's really what is on the website. So any statements of harm that come in, or statements of impact that come in that speak directly to that, those will be the things that the Grievance Council will facilitate. And there is a discovery conversation that happens after every received statement of impact or harm, so that the Grievance Council can determine whether it's a situation that falls within our purview. So it's possible that we'll get a statement of impact or harm that doesn't fall within our purview, and in that case, we won't actually facilitate it. So that's an important thing to know. And then there's a whole process that you'll see that's quite lovely and lengthy and described in detail. And it's the first draft, so I'm sure it'll get tumbled around and edited as we go through actual situations, as we hear actual facilitate actual processes, restorative justice processes.
Great.
Thanks, Christiane.
Let's see.
Pono has his hand up.
Hi, I'm just wondering if you could give us an idea of like how many grievances are typically filed or have been filed in the last year or 2 or 3, just kind of curious.
I can say that we have 2 to 3 current grievances that have been in front of us, but there's never been a process available to anyone on how to submit them. So we don't know what to expect. And we currently have 3 outstanding issues. And I'm not saying that 3 grievances, but we have 3 issues that we're addressing now. But basically the 3 have been on pause, and we've just been communicating with people. This is what we're doing to actually be able to serve our community. So in many ways, people are aware of what's happening, but it's been kept confidential, and everybody's kind of in a holding pattern as we learn and learn and learn.
Thank you.
What we can expect in the upcoming month is hopefully getting the input from heads of certifying bodies of the schools, and also a section on our website where grievances can be typed in, so that they're not emailed directly to anybody, so it will go through this process. And the other thing that you can expect on the website in the future will be the link to our working process document. Okay. We are at 2:29 where I am in Tennessee, so almost an hour and a half together, and I'm just really thankful that so many showed up, and hopefully more will see this. And we will do a follow-up email. So if you didn't get Steve's email, if you're interested, you will be getting that soon. I want to send it out when we can also know and commit to any funds that we can contribute towards people's $800 if you're going to do the class. And yeah, I just love what everybody has shared and contributed. The questions, the input from the committee members. So thank you. If there's nothing else, shall we just take a breath together in closing? Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.